Radio. Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. I'd like to take the time to go ahead and call this meeting to order. We do not currently have a quorum, so we will not be able to vote on any matters this evening. Please stand for the pledge of allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
Oh, we don't even have Tim here.
Right. So let's have a roll call. Be quick.
Margot Rain.
Matthew Lovely.
Tamara Stoner.
Thank you. Okay. I'm going to move the approval of last meeting's minutes to our next meeting. Takes us to public comments and any agenda items. Anyone from the public would like to make any comments? You're allowed 3 minutes.
Simple, sweet, nothing major. Just again, want to thank you guys for doing what you do. And thank you for coming to give a presentation, because I'm sure the meat of it will give us give them a lot of guidance, and it's greatly appreciated. And so I don't have to go on my soapbox. Thank goodness there's someone that's not going to be on this board, and we're good to go. So, thank you.
All right, thank you. Okay, we're done there. Great. Okay. All right, our next item, we are very fortunate to have Sean O'Neill with the Biden School for Public Policy with us to make a presentation on comprehensive plans. This would be a good opportunity for us to learn more about the comprehensive plans, because I don't think anyone here was on the anyone on our team was on the last cycle of the comprehensive planning. So this would be very helpful for the upcoming cycle. So thank you, Sean, for being here.
Sure.
We'll get out of your way.
No, all good. Whatever. Comfortable. Can I flip these on my own with one of these or not?
I don't think so.
No? Okay.
Well, you might be, actually. I may have the magic. I put it back. I don't have it.
Could he just use your mouse, or is that too far?
You can.
Yeah, sure. I got to split the mouse just that way. I don't have to tell you next slide or back and forth. Is that okay?
Yeah, thank you.
Should be able to, I think. Let's see. That's good.
Or just move the laptop? Huh?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's good.
Probably
I didn't need to
on the
click this
table.
slide.
That's.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. Thank you. Okay. All right, well, thanks for having me here tonight. Appreciate the invitation. Just a little bit of background. Margaret attended our training in January, and we connected over email, and turned out that she worked at the university, and so we were able to connect, and she thought might be a good idea to come present to you all tonight, and just sort of do a brief, little bit more direct overview of our planning 101, and try to answer whatever questions I can that might be helpful for you as planning commission. So I'm Sean O'Neill. I'm with the University of Delaware's Institute for Public Administration. We're in the Biden School of Public Policy. We're a research center that primarily does applied research work. We have students that work directly with us. Most of my work is planning oriented, so I work with DelDOT, with a lot of local communities throughout the state, also with state government, state planning. So we do kind of a wide range of things as a research center, but my stuff tends to be focused on planning. And one of the things I do is manage our local government training program. And so we have a planning 101 class that we teach every year in January. And but we have kind of a trimmed down version that I've done a number of times for different municipalities. So figured I could come here tonight and show you guys. So just an overview of the topics. We'll go over kind of some background of why we plan, context of legal, and then we'll talk about all the groups involved in planning partners, the plan itself, and then just like a brief overview of your existing plan. So going over why we need to plan. So it's a legislative requirement in Delaware, Title 22 municipalities, Title 9 for counties. Requires, it's a little bit different for counties, but it basically sets the rules for comp plans. Municipalities are supposed to, update their comprehensive plan once every 10 years. And then there's a 5-year review that you're supposed to, which I'll get to later. And that has been happening since, I guess, around 2000. They passed that law. So it wasn't always the case, but for a long time now, that's kind of been the standard in Delaware. It's, tended to be the basis for a lot of local decisions, primarily land use, and transportation, but there are a lot of other areas involved in the comprehensive plan. Changing regional conditions, and it's intended to be a guide for citizens and developers, and gives you eligibility for programs at other levels of government. So one of the things, and this actually directly relates to one of the other things that we're working on right now, we have a new grant assistance program that I'm not a part of, but it's very active. It's intended to work with towns like yourself. And if no one in Newcastle has connected with the grant assistance program from our office, I can help you do that. But one of the things that we knew before we started the program, but we're learning more and more, is that it's really important that you have key elements and guidelines and goals in your comprehensive plan in order to make you more successful when you're trying to go after money and grants at the federal and state level. So it relates to, you don't want to go after a grant and then sort of revise your plan to meet the grant just because the grant's out there. The grants are usually awarded based on when they can tell that you've planned ahead of time and that you've set goals. And this relates to something that you want to do as a town. So federal government's giving out money. They don't want to necessarily just give out money to anybody. They're kind of grading on different things. And that's one of the big things that they grade on, is they want to see that the place has this as part of a plan, has like a set idea. This relates to all their other goals. It all connects. And so then they give you the money to go do that.
Question.
Sure.
Sorry. Can you give us an example of some of the things that the grant would be used for, or what kind of things could we reach out for?
So a lot of the money right now is related to stormwater, flooding, water and sewer, things like anything that's kind of resiliency related, if you kind of understand that term, which clearly relates to a lot of I think,
Stormwater or
Right.
sea level rise?
sea level rise, stormwater, water sewer. There's a lot of funding coming through right now and the next year or two on that. There are also a lot of transportation dollars kind of focused on, bike ped improvements. So like, if you have thoughts on trails or, kind of revamping an entire corridor or street, that's another area that they're kind of looking. So, and those are just two examples. There are other grants. A lot of the funding coming through is from these big federal bills the last few years, right? So a lot of that was sort of directed at specific targets. One of them is on sustainability, resiliency. So like another thing that relates to that is making buildings more energy efficient. I'm sure you got a lot of buildings in town you could probably make more energy efficient, and you'd have to do that more. Well, because you have the most prominent historic town in Delaware and one of the most in the region. That also means that they're not as energy efficient, right? So, kind of thinking about that, particularly your municipal buildings, I think that those are a lot of times good targets for projects. So anyway, but building all those things kind of into the comp plan and thinking about your future vision for the town when you're doing the comp plan, that's part of it. Is that you want to understand that you're going to create opportunities for yourself down the line. So, in terms of the legal backing, this is kind of just top to bottom, and we have our US Constitution, the state constitution sort of sets basic laws, state code or more general state laws. That's where the framework for planning I talked about, Title 22. Then you have municipal charters. Those are kind of like your municipal constitution. So I would, I don't spend a great deal of time doing this, I'm perfectly honest with you, but as a planning commission member, it would be good for you to go check out your municipal charter and just, go through it, sort of see if anything stands out to you. That's something that I think appointed and elected officials should do that, honestly, most probably don't do, but it's important because it's a critical document for your municipality. So, and then there's the difference between ordinances and resolutions. Basically, all you need to know, like ordinance, you pass on by ordinance to law. Resolution, it really almost never has the force of law, but ordinances do. And so we always recommend that zoning, subdivision, and comp plans are adopted by ordinance so that they have the force of law. And then these are just kind of different elements of the Delaware Code that relate to the comprehensive plan and other planning elements. So you have your municipal planning authority, county planning authority, the state's role is defined in there. And I'll send you this presentation. Well, you already have it because I emailed it to you, so you guys can distribute that. If you want to go through the state, I'm not sure you need to go through all the state code and see all this stuff. But if you're interested, you can go find kind of where it all is in the state code. So there's all, kind of legal background, legal, outline for everything we do here. And everything you do as a planning commission. And it even outlines, specific responsibilities of the planning commission. One of which is to draft the comprehensive plan. And it's not always kind of done exactly to state code, but generally it's outlined there and you're supposed to kind of follow those guidelines. So talking about planning partners, this just kind of talks about how everything relates. In a town's overall plan in general, specific to the comp plan. You have your governing body, which appoints the planning commission. Planning commission prepares the plan that goes back to the governing body, which adopts it, and then goes to the governor. In between, you have, citizens who elect the governing body and people like yourself who are appointed to, planning commission or other appointed positions. And then, frequently we'll have consultants that assist, kind of all around. Planning commission, governing body, helps with the comp plan, kind of do all those things. So that's kind of how it all relates, it comes together. Ultimately, it's important to understand that everything goes through the governing body. So they get the final say on these decisions. And that's not the case everywhere, but in Delaware, it pretty much is always the case. There are a couple of exceptions. So state strategy. So this is the Office of State Planning Coordination, and every few years, I think they actually just updated it. I want to say last year. It's every 7 years, so this is like not quite updated. But they update their state strategies, and basically they have like kind of a GIS mapping algorithm that they use to identify 4 different levels, and they're sort of trying to identify where the state wants to direct development. So it doesn't technically say this is where we want everybody to develop, but it's really intended to say this is where we think the state should be investing dollars in an intelligent way. So, red areas are level 1, which are the most urbanized area, which I didn't look at that map in your comp plan, but I'm guessing almost the entire town is probably within level 1 here. There's probably, some exceptions there. Level 2 is kind of the next. So a lot of times we'll say, direct development to level 1 and 2 areas because they're the most urbanized area. You have your level 3 area, which is kind of like the lighter yellow, which is just outside those areas. And then the level 4 areas, kind of those white areas. And then there's also out of play, which is protected kind of environmental land. And so the state really, generally does not want to see a lot of development in those level 4 areas.
Just one thing,
Sure.
Sean, just to add a little bit to that. Historically, land use is a local, it's a local jurisdiction of you have the local authority here. And this is very typical of states. This is the state's way of influencing land use because they don't have the legislative authority, except in the broad sense that you have to have a comp plan and you have to have zoning. This is their way of encouraging you to direct growth in your comp plans to areas where they want to see it. Now, in a small urban area, as Sean said, we're we're gonna be all level one or level two, but this is the state's way of getting their hand into the,
Okay.
into the land use. You may be able, you can direct growth wherever you want, but you may not get cooperation from DelDOT on transportation improvements if it's not in a level one area, or you may not get favorable comments from state planning if it's not in a appropriate state spending area. So
Yeah, so and the reason that this came about in Delaware, my understanding anyway, is that there were a number of cases in the 90s where there was a lot of growth. And Delaware's unique in that DelDOT owns and manages over 90% of the roads in the state. And Delaware does a lot of things at the state level that most places do at the county level. So land use decisions are local decisions, and people at the state will tell you that. They'll back up to say no, land use, but at the same time, when the state are making these investments, they have to have some understanding at least. And so this is really kind of intended to say, like, as a state, this is where we want to invest our dollars. And so then it does kind of, guide what they think about what locals do. But at least to this point, there's not like very much from the state level that would override local decisions. And that is kind of a contentious thing around different topics nationwide. You have some states that are sort of jumping into that territory, and it can get a little controversial, but in general, Delaware, it's still, land use decisions are pretty much all made at the local level. This is really about the state saying where they think they should be investing their dollars. So getting to the plan, that's Ed O'Donnell, our longtime planner there. He used to be the chief planner for Newcastle County, and worked on a lot of plans with us in the past. So this is kind of a municipal planning overview. So the comprehensive plan touches all these things and some others. So you're talking growth and annexation, environmental protection, historic preservation, which is especially significant here, zoning subdivision or the land use code, economic community development, code enforcement, capital improvement program. I don't know, do you all have a capital improvement program here?
yeah, this in the budget process now. Yes, sir. Certainly.
Okay. Because not every place does in Delaware. It was more common in, frankly, in Pennsylvania and Maryland when I worked there than it is in Delaware, but there's, so that's good if you do. And community design, and then there's kind of a master planning process. That's a state plan coordinated thing. That's, slightly different thing, but we include that in here because it does relate to your comp plan. But, again, you can kind of see all these different areas that relate to a comp plan. And I always say it's not up there. The two primary things that the comp plan focuses on are the transportation network and mostly the land use side of things. But those two things kind of touch on many other things as well. So thinking about characteristics of the comprehensive plan, and this is kind of based in some legal precedent, that it's intended to be, it's statutorily mandated. It's like the Constitution, controls the direct use of property. It's implemented by rules. It's also intended to be a vision for the future, kind of all encompassing. So I'm talking about those targeted areas, but those things really touch on a lot of different things. It's physical in that it talks about design and roads and things like that. Long range. It's an ongoing process. So it's when you finish your comp plan, it is sort of set in stone, but it's also there, obviously, as there are processes to amend it and change it along the way as things change. So it's intentionally not overly specific is kind of the purpose of it, because you touch on so many different things, and then it's intended to be an overall guide for development.
So can you explain why Friends of Fletcher Brown is there?
So that case, and this is where I pull it from our overall presentation where we have a lawyer explain this, but
the city attorney.
yeah, it was Max. So Max Walton, this presentation for, but generally the big takeaway from that one is that the state Supreme Court decided in that case that a comp plan is like a constitution. So that was the actual language used in the case. So, and I think it used some of these other terms here too. So that's a state Supreme Court case precedent that outlines the purpose and characteristics of what a comp plan is intended to be.
Yeah.
I'm sure if you ask Max, or I could, find the summary of that case and why the precedent, matters in a little more detail, but that's generally it. That's why it's referenced on the slide. So these are required elements for all municipalities when you do a comp plan. And again, I know you guys did this a few years ago, so you don't have your update coming for a while. But they want you to have a position on population growth, housing growth, expansion of boundaries. So you're talking about annexation areas, development of adjacent areas to the town. So not just in the town, but they want you to touch on some of those things. Again, that relates to annexation, redevelopment potential within the town, community character, land use, community development, infrastructure issues. And they want you to have demonstrated that you've coordinated with state, county, and other municipalities in the area. One of the specific things that they want to get from municipalities during that process is, a clearly defined municipal boundary so that they can keep that up to date. And then, so for the additional requirements for municipalities over 2,000, which you'd be included in, it's a little bit more specific, where you have to have all these other things. And as you can see the difference in the language here, rather than having a position on many of these things, they want you to have policies, statements, goals, and planning components for all these other things. So it's much more specific in terms of all these other topics. And then, you can include other elements like public health and general welfare, if you want to include those. There's also a specific requirement for source water protection that is sort of DENREC related requirements. And those are all available online. You can look up in more detail what all those requirements are. So the land use element, like I said before, is really the most important element in Delaware, particularly, but and really any comprehensive plan, that's the most important element. And a really important thing to understand in a comp plan is the difference between an existing land use and future land use. So the existing land use is intended to outline what the current use of the land is and what the current pattern of the land is. So when you see an existing land use map, for example, or is described, that's what you're describing. You're describing what's there now, what the use is, and kind of the general pattern. It's like a snapshot. Future land use is intended to be the desired development pattern. But when you're doing it, you also have to consider the fact that in Delaware, it relates to zoning, specifically relates to zoning. So whatever you call an area for a future land use, you want to make sure that that's going to align with how the zoning gets updated. So, and I'll get to this in a second, but when you update a comp plan, you're required within 18 months. And again, I know you guys have already done this, but just doing the overview here. To update your zoning, and that zoning has to align with what you said your future land use was going to be. So you can see here, this is a future land use map for town of Camden. We did a few years ago, and the red is commercial. We outlined, and this is where you can kind of, be a little bit. You don't have to be overly specific, and in some ways it's better to not be overly specific. But we have mixed use areas, which could be commercial or residential, and we define that in the plan. When you say it's going to be mixed use on the map, in the plan there'll be an area where it says mixed use means this. And then you have your residential. So sometimes you'll see in plans where they'll break it down between multifamily and single family residential. But usually people will just say, and I think in your plan, you just say it's all residential, whether it's single family, multifamily, whatever, kind of group all those zones together. I think I have another slide here that helps relate the two together. So this one's on Plus Review. So you might have heard of Plus Review, and you guys I think have had some experience with that. So It's the preliminary land use service that goes through state planning. It was created by the Delaware State Code. It's intended for all major state agencies to be able to review certain types of projects. For the reasons I was mentioning before, because the state does a lot in Delaware and it kind of connects and relates a lot. So they want to be able to keep track of different development land use decisions that are happening. So, the plus review of comp plans is required by Delaware State Code. I think you all are familiar with the process. Sometimes the way it's described is like a little bit faster than it actually works. Just between us. So typically what happens is, you'll, with the comp plan anyway, you'll get your stuff ready to send into plus, make sure it's all checked. You send it in before the end of the month. You'll get a meeting the following month. And then there's another month before you get your comments back from them. And then you have to respond to the comments and send it back to them. And then you wait for their response. So in theory, it's a 3-month process, but really it's more like a 5-month process. And that's all intended to make sure everybody's on the same page. So in reality, if you didn't have to do all that, you'd have to have all these separate conversations with all the agencies anyway. So it does take some time sometimes, but it is necessary, again, just because of the nature of how Delaware is. And that we've decided to do everything at the state level here. So again, they have a new kind of online form. There's a lot of different stuff. You can check it out online on their website. It's easy to find. They've made it a little bit easier to use than it was previously.
And Sean,
Sure.
the plus review it's not like gospel, it's just like recommendations or inquiries, or are there things that they mandate for this?
Sometimes, like usually there might be, sometimes there are none, and they call them like certification requirements, which means they will not recommend certifications if you don't address these things. They're usually like, we asked for your municipal boundary, you didn't send it to us, or we looked this up and this is wrong. Like you did something wrong. Or we don't see any evidence that you coordinated with the county. So it's not going to be, like a policy or goal you put in the plan.
Okay.
It'll be something like that. Right. Yeah, exactly. Like usually it's more procedural things that they'll say, and that'll be called certification review. The vast majority of the comments are basically recommendations, and it's generally good practice to address as many of them as you can within reason, but sometimes the state will have recommendations and the municipality doesn't agree, and that's okay. You have to respond to them and give them like a justification why you're doing it and where you're doing it or why not. But it's not a requirement for you to do everything they ask you to do. Again, going back to the local land use, it's just it's a process to coordinate with the state, basically, and that's really what it's intended.
And also, you remember that Plus also reviews development plan over
Yes.
certain size.
Yeah.
So you were involved with Plus when they reviewed ordinance 536 relative to the comp plan amendment, but you're also were involved with Plus when they reviewed. It might have been after you, the 2 special exceptions that have been through recently for the multifamily in the PG zone.
Yeah, and a lot of times, when it's development specific, it might not be critical or as critical for every agency, but there'll be a couple agencies like DelDOT that need to kind of be part of that process anyway. So in terms of implementation and review of the comp plan, the required actions are the comprehensive rezoning that I mentioned before. Within 18 months of an adopted plan, you're required to update your zoning, and that has to relate to your future land use, which I'll get to in a second on the next slide. You're required to submit an annual report every year to state planning, and I would recommend that that's something that like planning commission should see every year when you submit it, just to kind of understand what's going to state planning. Because, again, technically you're the lead appointed agency and recommending body for the city council. So if it's planning related, it would be good for you to at least have an opportunity to see it.
Do you know when that's due?
I think it's due in before July every year, right?
I'm sorry, you're talking about the annual report?
Yeah,
Yeah, that, the planning commission generates that and forwards it to city council,
okay,
and then the city council reviews it and the mayor forwards it to state planning, so it's mostly generated here.
okay, good, yeah,
Last time we went through, there was an implementation section, and then we went through most of the implementation items and gave up a status, and they're in the process of trying to prioritize what implementation items they feel are most important today. The planning commission is trying to prioritize what's most important in the comp plan and what's. So,
yeah, I got you. No, yeah, I mean, and that's what you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
Now, I say that 'cause, like, you know, not everybody does it, and some of the smaller towns especially, you know, sometimes they just don't know or whatever, but, you know, you guys are doing everything the right way. You know, there's other recommended actions there, that are not necessarily required, but, and then your plan review and update, comprehensive plan must be reviewed every 5 years. That can be pretty administrative or minimal if that's, you know, what you think is necessary. Usually it's nowhere near, you know, the extent of a 10-year update, but occasionally it is. It depends on how much you have going on. We're working again, like with Camden right now, they have their 5-year update coming up, and they're having a major bypass route going through the middle of their town, and they have like 4 or 5 major developments going on. So we're considering like something close to a full update for them because they have so much going on. Usually there's not a whole lot, but it's good practice for you to, you know, spend a little bit of time to just thoroughly go through your plan, and anything that's significantly changed, they want you to kind of update at that 5-year review, which, you know, you're not going to be at until 2025. So you got some time to think about that.
Yes, sir, for a question.
Sure.
On the annual report, is this public information that everyone can see?
I believe so. Yeah, it usually is. Yeah.
Would other municipalities have submitted as well then?
I don't know if everybody posts it. That's a good question. I can follow up with state planning. I'm sure if you called state planning, you know, you
Just
probably
interesting
get.
to see what others are doing, how we compare to it.
Sure, yeah. You know, they're usually, you know, generally kind of tracking some of your major goals in the plan, some of the major developments that happen in town. And then I think there are like some kind of, you know, specific numbers they like to track how much development's happening, you know, things like that. So, but yeah, that's a good question. I mean, it should all be public information. You know, I'm not sure if it's all publicly available readily online, but, you know, probably get it for you if you're interested. So this is what I was referring to earlier with the land use and zoning link. So you can kind of see how they relate to each other. The map on the right is a zoning map, and the map on the left is your future land use map. And I think this is for Clayton. So you can see, you know, here there are like 5 different residential districts that are all included in the future land use map as, you know, plainly residential. They're all called residential. But in addition to that, in the future land use map, we have identified, you know, institutional property, and, you know, they've identified a town center that don't directly relate to the zoning. So they're just slightly different things. You know, again, the future land use map is intended to be kind of forward looking and more flexible, whereas like the zoning it's, you know, kind of legally binding. Everybody here is familiar with what zoning is. So it's just important to understand, you know, how they relate and how they're different. So, you know, I just briefly went through your comprehensive plan. You know, that's pretty recently done. Couple of the highlights here, and you said that they were looking at prioritizing goals. So maybe we don't need this slide. I threw it in here just for kind of discussion after the presentation. But, you know, these were some of the things that stuck out to me. You know, you talked about attracting private development, driving growth away from vulnerable areas, enhancing bike and pedestrian connections. Again, some of these relate to some opportunities that might be out there for grants and other things. But these are kind of generally things that you can be thinking about as you're reviewing plans and as you're, you know, kind of going through your work.
Question on the parking.
Sure.
These have development that come through and they're using a number of 1.5 parking spaces per units that are going in.
What kind of development?
Apartments.
Okay. Mixed use.
The question I have is, where did that that horrible 1.5 number come?
So. It's parking
have
is
to
always
have a
kind of a
car?
complicated, parking is always kind of a complicated question. In general, I would say that most developments over the last, I don't know, 40-50 years have been pretty overparked. And so there's kind of a movement towards planning for less parking for a lot of developments. But it really, I would say it really depends on the details of the development. You know, I would say, you know, there's less reliance on cars by a lot of people than there used to be, but depends on a lot of things like, you know, public transportation access, kind of where you are, where people work, you know, how many studios and 1 bedrooms do you have? How many 3 bedrooms do you have? Like the unit mix of an apartment can make a difference. Personally, I think a lot of times townhouse communities are underparked because there's the assumption that people are going to use the garage for the car, which nobody ever does. But yeah, so 1.5, like I think like generally that'd be on the lower end of an apartment community, but it's not unheard of. I mean, I've been in, I've worked in plenty of other communities that have been at that rate or lower even, and not even recently, like in the past, so.
So based upon your comment, you talk about different types of units.
Mhm.
1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3 bedrooms. From understanding the 1.5 is based upon a unit, they didn't take into consideration of the type of unit. So is that something that should also be considered when identifying how many parking spaces go in?
I think that's a good practice to understand the unit mix when you're deciding parking, but I don't know that that's something that's commonly done, but I used to work in the multifamily industry too, so I know that stuff better than most. But I know that the company I worked for, and this would have been, you know, 12 years ago, there was a apartment community that we built that was, I think, 1.4. That was not like right on top of a metro station or something like that. You know, so you know, it's again, like and sometimes you'll have apartment developments that'll be like 2 spaces per unit. You know, which sometimes can be much more than you need. So, you know, there's a lot of different reasons for the interest in reducing the parking requirements. One is kind of environmental, like it's better to not have as much impervious surface. Another is that the more parking you require, the higher the cost of the development becomes. So it makes it less feasible for developers to do. And then, you know, kind of, like I said, kind of the unit mixes tend to be more studios and 1 bedrooms than they maybe have been in apartment developments in the past. So, you know, if you have a 1 bedroom or a studio, you probably don't have as much need for parking spaces as you do if you have 2 bedrooms, right? Because you're probably gonna have two people living there. So, you know, so there are a lot of different factors to consider. Parking is a really complicated topic. There's a lot of different ways you can manage it. There's a lot of different ways that, you know, people talk about managing it, and actually getting it done sometimes can be more complicated than what you might throw into a comp plan, for example. And that kind of relates to, you know, you have a lot of good goals and you know, generally kind of like good vision for the town, the comp plan. But comp plans, you know, need implementation, follow-up and all those things. So it's good that you're already having those discussions on kind of implementation priorities.
Just to put some clarity for the councilman's question. So that's 1.5 spaces per unit in the DG zone, and that's where we saw the most recent developments, the one on Delaware Street and the one on South 7th Street. So it's 1.5 per unit just in that zone. Multifamily units in other zones where multifamily units are permitted, it's 2 units, 2 spaces per unit. So the DG zone is kind of special because it promotes a mix of, it's intended to promote a mix of uses and a mix of mixed use development. So
What does DG stand for?
Downtown Gateway District,
Oh, okay.
which is directly related to the 2009 plan per Sean's comment of the linking the future land use to zoning. It was specifically called out in 2009 and it became a zoning district in 2014, and that was carried over in the 2020 plan. So it's still, that's kind of the genesis of the Downtown Gateway District.
Thank you.
You are.
So, and there's more, I kind of summarized that in terms of optimized parking, there was more to it, but I think the full statement related to the historic area, which is, that's a pretty common thing in historic areas. They, tend to be built before cars, so they tend to be really nice walkable places, but they're not specifically designed for cars, so a lot of times you don't have as much parking. So that's not an uncommon thing in a historic area. So these are all things to consider. Happy to talk to you about, what other implementation priorities you're going through. This is the future land use map that you had put together. So I just wanted to show that you do have a large amount of space, I would say, for open space and recreation. And then, kind of big light industrial office park. And then, a little bit less for industrial and a fair amount of residential. So, and then actually a good amount of mixed use in there too. So,
It'll be filled in.
yeah.
We're working on it.
But again, like it should relate to your zoning anyway too. And, I'm assuming you did the zoning update recently following the comp plan? No?
No, it's
For instance,
long story short, that future land use plan just took the zoning, the last planning commission, when they did it,
Yeah,
they decided to take the existing zoning
yeah,
and disaggregate it into general land use districts. So that's just a reflection of the zoning at the
Yeah.
time.
sometimes that, I mean, that's not that uncommon.
In a built
Sometimes tends to be
environment,
that.
you're not gonna have that much change
Yeah.
in future land use and existing land use.
Yeah.
Or zoning.
Right.
So that's what they did.
Yeah.
And it's explicitly said, this is what we're doing.
Mhm.
And the city council can consider changes to the future land use plan as changes arise, and they just considered a significant land use change to the future land use map,
Mhm.
just last month.
Good. So that's all the slides I have, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you all might have about any of those things or anything else. If you're, prioritizing different things in terms of implementation, or if there's other things that you've kind of been discussing.
Actually, I don't know if you can answer it. I don't know if anybody can answer it at this point. I know there's some proposed legislation before this, whenever, down in Dover, that they're calling it Ready in 6.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of development goes to Maryland and Pennsylvania, because you can go from, I want this, to being able to put a shovel in the ground in 6 months in other states. Here, you can never do anything in 6 months. It can, I've got a client, we're going on 4 years trying to get it all squared away. And when I just look at how long some of the things have taken, just in the couple months I've been here, I can start to see why it takes so long. So I'm assuming if that got passed, that would also impact us.
I would say, like, it depends on a lot of things. Depends, it's really a local question in most places. So it would depend highly on where you're developing in Maryland and Pennsylvania. I'd say that the one significant difference between Delaware and most other states is that we do a lot at the state level, and that tends to sometimes slow things down. So again, if it was done at the municipal level or even the county level, some of these things would probably happen faster than they do. But because they're done at the state level, it
We're such
requires a lot of
small
coordination.
state, Yeah,
So basically, if you think about it this way, yes, we are a small state, but we have 3 counties and we have 1 million people. So if you think about it, the way that we administer things in the state, or not everything, but a lot of things, it's almost like if you have a county that's 1 million people and as big as Delaware is, and we're trying to administer the same amount as, you know, Caroline County, Maryland, or whatever, you know, some small county in middle Pennsylvania. It's just much different. And then you have all your state requirements and everything kind of mixed in. Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, a lot of focus on that has been on plus. I don't think that you're ever going to save very much time by getting rid of the plus process, because like I said, you're going to have to do the coordination with DOT and all these agencies anyway. At most, like maybe you'd save a month or two, but you know, I think I think that's kind of the wrong target. That's been part of like what people have sort of focused on, but I don't really think that that's what's holding a lot of things up. It's,
They
yeah.
were talking, when I was down there and they were discussing that legislation, they were saying to try to get some of these processes to be running parallel, as opposed to you have to complete A and then you go to B and then you go to C, to try and do them simultaneously.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, I mean, it'd be interesting to look at, you know, someplace like, you know, again, like Chester County, Pennsylvania, or Montgomery County or Anne Arundel County, Maryland, like how long does it take for them to get projects through? I can tell you for a fact, it's not 6 months, you know, so, again, but if you go to, you know, again, like a very rural populated county in the center of Pennsylvania, maybe they'll fast track everything. So it really just depends on where you go. I don't think it's a state specific issue in other states. I think it's county by county. And I think in Delaware, a lot of it has to do with the fact that we do a lot at the state level, and you know, it's just more bureaucracy basically, which takes time. You know, that's the simplest answer I can give in terms of how I understand it.
And,
Yeah.
and the things that you've happened to see in your relative newness on the planning commission are fairly anomalies. You know, you started off with a significant comprehensive land use change request, where the developer waived the time that you had to review it. And voluntarily answered all of these questions. It took months, and then enough was enough. You know, if that was a by right site plan, it would be 6 months. And the other things, the multifamily that you've seen have been special exceptions. So that's a recommendation here. It goes to the Board of Adjustment. It goes back to site plan. So that's going to be more than 6 months, but those are just functions of the development that they've chosen to do and what your zoning says. And council chose years ago to make multifamily special exceptions in the downtown gateway district as well. There's, you know, that's one of these days you'll get a by right site plan, and you'll see a preliminary plan, and then it'll do engineering, and then they'll come back in with the final.
Sure, I'll say, yeah, you're entirely right. In addition to what I was saying before, it's also specific to the code and how each land use is treated in each individual code. So I've heard other comments related to that. We're like, oh, well, we should just get all the municipalities and the counties together and have all one big zoning. And it's like there is not an example of that anywhere in the world, as far as I know.
I
Like,
was gonna say,
it's
that
just
just
not
sounds
how.
worse.
Yeah. Sure.
Thank you, Samara. Thank you for the presentation. It was wonderful. I just had a quick question, I guess, a little bit off of what was communicated earlier. As far as, is there sort of like a checklist, a timeline, milestones when you're preparing such a plan? Is there like a go-to sheet that would help us, like just even planning our meetings to make sure that we're being productive and we're moving toward the goal of getting it finalized?
Well, where you are in the process, because your plan was just adopted in 2020, you don't have to do a full update until 2030.
Understood.
Yeah.
So I guess I was just asking, like, when it comes to review time and things like that, just from my knowledge, is there something that exists like that helps you along the way as far as like a checklist or milestones and things like that? Or does someone come and walk you through the process?
For a full comp plan update?
A comprehensive plan update, a review.
So they'd be different things, like for the 5-year review, I don't know, I would say it's like, you're probably talking like a 5 to 6 month process if you're gonna do like a bigger kind of review where you're reading through it. Sometimes it's more administrative than that. A full comp plan review, I always tell people to plan for at least 18 months. Because it's really a year to draft and write the plan, and then you want to plan for 5 or 6 months for plus the back and forth. But that's, years down the road. In terms of the individual development plan review, I would say in general, it's just good to have a good thorough understanding of what your comprehensive plan says, what your municipal charter says, what the zoning, kind of regulations are in the town, just learn as much about those things as you can. And then as projects come in, you'll be kind of, fueled with all that information to process it and understand, whether it makes sense, how it relates to this, how everything kind of relates together. And then as you do more and more of them, you kind of learn along the way. It's, it's a volunteer position, so you can only dedicate so much time, but that's what I would say, is just to have like a really good, thorough understanding of kind of all the base material for the town that is supposed to be your guide. You definitely want to understand the zoning code very thoroughly if you're reviewing development review,
Okay.
and kind of understand the
I'm so
differences,
analytical, I
nuance.
just, in my mind, I'm
Yeah.
thinking it's something like really concrete and it's like, black and white, this is what you have to do and.
Well, the developments, so like you do your comp plan, then you update your zoning, and then you kind of set the rules, and then sometimes later on, you might want to consider rezoning or different kind of planning projects, or maybe there's, like a trail, or, different things that might come up. But in general, after that, you're gonna be reviewing a lot of development proposals or amendments or additions to houses or different things like that. And, that can kind of seem like really in the weeds compared to this stuff, but it all stems from this stuff. And it's important to understand that. And then you can kind of relate back to your understanding and, kind of the big picture of what you wanted as a town and how things have kind of developed. And a lot of times it's good. I think Max always actually recommends doing this. When you give an opinion, it's good to relate it to, something in the comp plan or something in zoning, right? Because then it gives you justification if something comes up down the line, that it's not just a random opinion. You said yes with no explanation or reasoning. It's good to have that kind of background to back you up and back your decision up. So, you're not the extent of Board of Adjustments is legitimately like quasi judicial. Planning Commission is like a little bit like that. I mean, you're really a recommending body to the city council most of the time. But you can kind of think about it like that when it comes to development reviews a little bit. Like you want to think about it like you're going through almost like a legal kind of process, and this is all part of the background of that. So that's what I would say. But
Site plans, they do approve the planning commission.
oh, so you administratively approve site plans, they don't go to council?
They go to council. We just amended the ordinance last year.
Okay.
Like the county, before they
Yeah,
subdivision would go to council, but their council's role is administrative,
yes,
just like the county.
yeah,
So it's unless there's something.
I gotcha.
So they have a lot.
that's a little different. Yeah, that's actually a good thing. It gives you more authority over those decisions. I think that's a good thing. But it's all the more important to kind of have the background and understanding of what's going on. So,
And it's better, the annual report that we're talking about, that's like a checklist from state planning relative to your comp plan. So that's a good time to say, how's this going? And I don't have the questions in front of me, but it's a series of questions being asked by state planning relative to where you are per your comp plan. Has your population grown such that, something's irrelevant in your comp plan? So that's a good, every year you kind of stop and, take stock of where we are relative to the comp plan, in addition to the 5-year review and 10-year updates.
Commissioner, can I ask clarification on?
Sure.
Multifamily dwellings and mixed use. How would that, in your mind, be defined? And does that have more density than, say, 10 housing units per acre?
Yeah, it really depends. It can, that's a.
We
There's
have
no
a-
clear answer to that question.
I'd want to stay away from anything
Yeah.
because that sounds like a specific to a project that's going to be coming back before the planning commission. So
Well,
Yeah.
I can ask them outside of here, it doesn't matter, it's still
Yeah.
a clarification question.
It can vary. So you're saying multifamily can multifamily be a part of a mixed use project?
Well, yeah, what would be the density of, is there a defined density to that?
There's usually not defined density. Well, that's not true. The density is usually defined in the zoning, but that can vary a lot. Like you could have multifamily density that is very low or something that's very high. It really relates to what the zoning.
That is where it is.
Yeah, and then where it is, and you might have multiple different multifamily districts, like one could be 6 units an acre, one could be 15 units an acre. I mean, you know, it's.
So basically, it's not defined, it's taking away from a definition of 10 housing units per acre to basically opening the door to anybody's.
No,
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 I
no,
don't think
no,
so.
no, there's
it's a range, and it's more of a style of development, you know, so it's. There's no, like the 10 units per acre. A lot of times that would be multifamily, but you could build a project that's not multifamily that would have 10 units per acre too, depending on how the zoning's designed. So it really depends on on the details of the zoning district.
So it's basically taking away the definition of a particular density.
Wait a minute, where did you get the 10 per acre from? Where did that?
Because right now it's written for the gateway, that it's controlled by 10 units per acre. And what's being brought up as a change to just generalizing it to changing it from 10 housing units per acre to multifamily mixed use, which has no definition and no control, because it'll be up to whatever's proposed will be okay, and it could be more, it could be less, but there's no definition, no controlling it.
That's such a specific, I'm not even, this isn't even a comment, that's such a specific question to your zoning code. I would defer to Max on that one. Because it really depends on how it's defined in the code, and it's really a legal question at that point.
Yeah.
Just like,
Yeah, it's something,
okay,
something we'll address as it comes up, right, Chris? Is that-
Yeah, you may see an ordinance in the future relative to the DG zone that.
yeah,
Yeah, and that's where
likely.
the devil's in the details with the zoning and when you adopted ordinance and all.
Thank you.
But you know, at the end of the day, it's council's decision to decide what you want to decide. I mean, you're the elected officials, you have the decision-making authority at the end of the day. And planning commission's, you know, recommending body and administrative control, so. You can make any decisions that you want under state law, you know, that are okay by local land use, so.
So getting back to our comprehensive plan, so in 2005, we need to do the review. So I'm assuming that means by December of
2025.
Yeah, 2025, we have to turn our report in for the review, correct?
So you turn in the report in June before July 1 every year, isn't it right?
The annual report, yeah.
the annual report.
So it would be
So-
part of the annual report that
So
thing
your,
in 2025?
so your 5-year update is technically due in December 2025.
Okay,
So you'd probably be reviewing it for the 5-year review in the fall of 2024,
okay.
right? So that you would send it in, yeah.
So I'm thinking, I'm thinking since none of us have know really about this, we need to start before then.
That's what I was asking.
But I'm sorry, I got that wrong. It would be in the fall of 2025. I'm confusing myself here. Yeah, so it's yeah.
But we probably should start it next January, give ourselves 18 months to figure this out. Okay.
Well, ideally, if we look at it annually, we can just kind of like accumulate the notes from each year and just. kind of,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't, for the 5-year review, it's up to you, but, you probably don't really need to be thinking about that. If it's not due until December 2025, I wouldn't think you'd really begin to need to think too much about that until.
Except I would have to admit, I've not read this yet, so now I know I need to go back and learn it.
Yeah, and
Memorize?
so,
No.
yeah, so like, and reading every word of a comp plan is tough. I mean, when you're writing it, it's like it gets to be tough, but, there are the goals at the end, and then the maps, I would say, are probably the two most significant things you wanna make sure that you're on top of. And then, you can read through it as you want, but, so I would say make sure that you're up to date and, clear on kind of the major elements of the comp plan. And, definitely make sure that you're well versed with the zoning code. And if you need clarification, I'm sure, people can help out with that. Yeah, and again, like, it's not fun reading, but I would go, check out, look at your municipal charter. And,
Yeah, I've got no.
yeah, I mean, that can be super boring too, but again, that's an important document for the town, just because it just gives you a basis for everything else moving forward, and it's kind of just a good way to start to understand what that says, understand the key elements of the comp plan. And then, you'll be looking at the zoning code all the time, but make sure you're well versed in that. And, ideally how it relates to your plan, so.
And I don't know if we'll all still be on the board in 2030, but I'm assuming we could go back to your office for help. when we
Usually
get-
there's like 1 or 2 people that go from plan to plan, in my experience, like, you'll do a plan update, and typically there'll be like 1 or 2 that did the last plan. So, that's why we do our planning 101 every year, because there's always turnover. I mean, there's 57 towns and municipalities in the state, and there's always need for more training on all this stuff. So there's a lot of turnover, but yeah,
Great. Well, thank you very much.
sure, no, yeah,
Thank you
happy to be here. Hopefully it was helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Uh,
and
And,
it's recorded, right? So the
yeah.
people who
Yeah.
missed it can,
You have the presentation, I'm happy to share, and it seems like you're in good hands. You guys have good process. You got Max, you got Chris, these guys know what they're doing. So you're in good hands here, and you're following a good process, and that's really the most important thing. In addition to having enough active people, right, like you were mentioning earlier, which I'm sure you'll get there once you guys work through.
Once we get the mayor back, we'll have no more people
Yeah,
back.
you'll be all right, yeah. Well, I mean, I think people will demand it at some point, so, right,
Yeah.
because you got to approve stuff.
Right.
So, anyway, appreciate.
Thank you.
Thank
you.
for coming.
Thank
being here tonight. Yeah, thank you.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you guys for your questions. Appreciate that as well. Thanks for your commentary.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
oh yeah, we gotta give Chris his laptop back.
Yeah. I wasn't gonna forget that.
He probably wouldn't have let it.
Great.
Thank you, Chris, for
Yeah.
jumping in.
Okay, the next item is follow-up discussion to last month's meeting regarding any annual reports. Discussion, is there anything that was kind of left off there that we wanted to talk about, or
I don't remember, I don't think we
or
talked.
do we not touch on that? Is it something we want to touch on put on for the June calendar? We have
I think all we talked about was that Sean was gonna be here to talk about the planning commission.
Or you mean about the comprehensive plans? Yep.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay. Okay, great. Then we'll move on from that. Any further comments from commissioners, from the commissioners?
I think that's the end of the meeting.
That note.
That was pretty funny.
My money's on UConn. All right, well, then can I ask for a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Wait a minute, one quick
Yeah.
question.
Oh.
Since we have to get a report to Dover in June,
Yes.
has that been drafted? Do we know what it's gonna say? Who does that? Cause this is the end of May.
July.
July,
Right.
Oh, it's due in July?
I get my calendar here. This year. It was just forwarded to,
The report?
Yeah, it may be calendar year. I can't remember what Sean said, because it wasn't that long ago where the mayor, I made a presentation to mayor and council on the annual report.
Can you just,
Yes, I will double check. I should go. What's it now? You remember whether it was the end of the year or was it?
I know we did one, the last one, when Gail was still
Yeah.
here.
Such a liar,
I thought- Oh, for last year?
because it seems it's July now.
I think so. I think it is July. Yeah.
Yes, if it's July, we should, it's a form. And it took us a couple meetings to go through it and to prioritize it, so.
so we're running out of time for that.
So really, it seems like all we did was change the wording on a couple items, Chris, and then we talked about some things that we did as results.
Can we get a copy of the last one we filed so we can look at it and what the questions were?
Yep.
And then be prepared to discuss it for the June meeting? Sorry.
Nope, that's good.
That's fine.
Does council approve that? Or is that just,
It's it's signed by the mayor. I presented it to council. They gave it the nod. I don't know if it's worded as the planning commission's annual report on the status of your comprehensive plan. Or it's city council's report on the city council, on the status of your comprehensive plan.
because it's due in July,
Yeah,
council's on the 11th, that's 1 month for you guys.
not only that, well,
Yeah.
the other thing is that a mayor will not be in place till September at the earliest. So if the mayor has to sign off on it, then
We got a problem.
we'll be able to.
It's nothing that's critical where you're gonna get, in trouble if it's not.
Do we just need to send them a letter or an email saying we'll be submitting it in September when we get a new mayor?
Right, do we ask for an extension or
I don't,
how does this work?
I don't know about not having a mayor. And,
Can you find that out?
yes,
Thank you.
We left, but it's part of the.
Yeah, that's why I was
Process.
asking about milestones and dates, like,
Right.
I don't want to lose sight of what we're supposed to be doing, so we are having the most productive meetings, you know.
Mhm. No, that was a good point. Okay, so for the next month's meeting, we're going to, in addition to hopefully approving the minutes from April, we're also going to be adding the annual report discussion, which we hope to have between June and July. We'll work on firming that up, so if we can get it submitted without a mayor's signature, we will do that as well. So that gives 2 meetings. Hopefully that's good time frame.
And they can, yeah, if we can get it, get the copy from last time, and I think that should make it easier to see what we need to update.
I'm almost gonna be there in a few seconds.
It really seemed like there was just a lot of wording. We changed
I'm not in a super big hurry, so I can wait a couple minutes. It's
Good.
chilling in here.
Just see what other municipalities. do.
I know, I like that idea. I'm curious.
Too wordy, not wordy enough, just trying to understand
right.
what others are doing, kind of set with them.
Good point, yeah. Well, Chris, if you can get that to us when you find it, thank you very much. We can go ahead and move forward and adjourn the meeting. If we have a motion to adjourn, then we can.
I motion we adjourn the meeting. Margot Reed.
Second, Tamara.
All right, then therefore we are adjourned. Thank you, gentlemen, for attending. Chris, thank you as always. Appreciate that. Yeah. Glad Sean could make it. That was great.
That was helpful. I'm just sorry not, there weren't more people here.